Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Dr. Mariela Glandt is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her first appearance on episode 429 and her second appearance in episode 461 of Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Mariela Glandt, trained as an internist at Harvard and an endocrinologist at Columbia University, has more than 2 decades of experience in the treatment of diabetes and chronic disease. Several years ago, she discovered the growing low-carbohydrate movement, and based on what she was learning and observing, she had decided to change her approach to the treatment of diabetes. She is the founder and director of Glandt Center for Diabetes Care in Tel Aviv, Israel, which specializes in the optimization of diabetes care through the use of very low-carbohydrate diets. Dr. Glandt is involved in clinical trials, actively publishes articles in medical journals, lectures in Israel and abroad, and teaches medical residents at Bronx Hospital in New York City. She is the co-founder of Eat Sane, which makes low-carbohydrate food products with no artificial sweeteners. I met Dr. Glandt in person at an amazing conference at Low Carb Denver 2023, and it is such an honor to welcome her back to Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Glandt, what an honor to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
It's so much fun to talk to you. I'm so excited. Thanks for inviting me.
I've had such a great time chatting to you at the conference, and our 2 episodes after that, you just released an amazing, not a study, but an audit, which is wonderful. It just came out a few weeks ago. I'm so excited to chat with you about that. I just told you offline, you just found out a few minutes ago when I told you that there's not going to be a low carbohydrate or low carb Denver 2024, which I'm so bummed out about. I think you were kind of like waiting for details and they never came out.
Well, yeah, I understand. I understand it's like so much work to put this stuff together. So I'm grateful that it happens when it happens.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be a lot more grateful the next time it comes around to be in that room with all the energy of all these people. And it's such a wonderful time. Any of these conferences are absolutely wonderful. As we talked about last time, you are from Argentina. You had an amazing time watching the World Cup and partying with your entire country. Oh. So awesome. Do you have Netflix, by the way? Do you ever watch Netflix?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a when you have time, which you probably never have time. There's a new documentary on Netflix called Captains of the World, and it's all about the 2022 World Cup, and it really features Argentina, obviously, as the champions. It was wonderful to watch.
Oh, God, I didn't know that. I've got to watch that. My son will love it. I mean, he's totally nuts about football, soccer. I mean, and
yeah, he will absolutely love it. It was heartbreaking as a Brazilian fan. Like, it was really tough to watch, but seeing Messi and all the players in Argentina and watching them get to the final it's so fascinating. You'll love it.
Okay, I'm definitely going to watch it. Yeah. I have to say, it just takes over your personality. This winning the World Cup, that moment, you just, you can go wild.
Pandemonium.
It's insane.
One of the very first things that it shows as the documentary starting is the World Cup final was watched by half of the population of Earth. We think about the Super Bowl or any of these other things being big events. Nothing compares to the World Cup. Half the population of planet Earth. Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely.
It's literally, it's just like one ball going between 2 posts, and it's like the end of the world.
So good. Well, okay, so you're gonna absolutely love that. I'm excited for it. I'm a little jealous. I would love to go back and watch it again for the first time, but I think you're gonna absolutely love it.
It's a dopamine rush that
totally. Totally, absolutely. Well, it has been a little while since you've been able to come on the show. So if you don't mind, could you tell the audience who you are and how you got interested in what you are interested in?
I'm interested in making people healthy. That's what it's all about. That's what I dedicate my 24 hours a day to. It's funny, you just can't escape it. No matter where you go, no matter who you speak to, whether it's a party or a taxi driver, you end up talking about this, because you feel like you have like a treasure and you want to share it with people, Yeah. I think one of the things you didn't say in your, in the intro, which is maybe the most important thing right now, is that we're building ONA Health. So I should update that, but ONA it's really what we're working on now and trying to bring this to the masses. So to go back to your question, like where am I coming from? Well, as you mentioned, I'm an endocrinologist. I've been treating diabetes for 20 plus years, almost 25 years, and obesity, metabolic disease. Not so much before. I was only focused on diabetes because I didn't realize that I actually know how to treat obesity too now. But before, I didn't. I didn't know how to treat obesity. This is so interesting. You're making me realize something. Back in like 2013 or so, some people came to me and said, "We want to build a diabetes and obesity center." It was a bariatric surgeon and other people. And I was like, well, that's great, but I only know how to treat diabetes. Like I have no idea how to treat obesity because that was me in my old self who didn't know, how to really treat diabetes, right? So if you only know how to use drugs, then you don't understand how to treat obesity. Now, thinking about it right now as I'm speaking to you, I think that's pretty funny that was my response. I was like, I don't know how to treat obesity, and I didn't. I didn't. What were my tools for treating obesity? There was no Ozempic. There were no medications that were useful, and I had no idea. And I knew that telling people to eat less, move more didn't work. So I said to the guys, I'm not going to build a center where I can't really contribute besides the diabetes part.
Wow.
So I think that's kind of ironic and kind of emblematic of what a normal endocrinologist feels like until these drugs came out recently. But, not understanding the pathophysiology of obesity and diabetes and not realizing that diabetes is clearly just an obvious, symptom of insulin resistance, and then a continuum of obesity, or not. It's just another symptom of insulin resistance, right? So once you treat the insulin resistance, it all gets better. Yeah. So anyway.
Wow. Well, I loved your presentation at Low Carb Denver, and the patient profile that you showed there really was a great way to kind of see what you're talking about here. And you showed your patient, was it HK? Was that his name?
Yeah, you still remember him. Great HK. Memory.
Oh, I love that guy. Yeah, he's great. And you showed him and, all the things that he had been diagnosed with, and you showed him as a controlled, kind of case study. Like this is everything he's dealing with, he's doing okay. And your definition of what okay was in the past is so unacceptable for you now, right?
Exactly. It's absolutely, what we accept people being on 6, 8 drugs. And as long as their A1C is okay, we're like, oh, this patient is well controlled. Well, no, actually, we could do things a lot better. So it really matters how we treat patients. We're not just looking at a number, but it's the whole picture of metabolic syndrome. We want to get rid of it. And the good thing is when you treat that, as I just said, you treat everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is, it's the way I think we should be treating metabolic disease.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you're doing amazing work to get that message out there. Again, we've got this publication that we can talk about here in a second. But I think about how many doctors in your position will never get this information. How was it that you were able to find this information to begin with?
Oh, it was just a combination of things, but I have a lifelong friend. Her name is Jessica Apple. She had we actually started. I was the medical director for her for a website that she started called sweetlife.org, that ran until like last year, and she and her brother were always talking to me about low carb, and I think I might have said this before, but I didn't quite understand it. I was like, yeah, of course we should eat low carb. Yes, we should avoid sugars, but then I really think what clicked it for me was Sarah Hallberg's video, her famous, her lecture on how to reverse diabetes by ignoring the guidelines. And I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And I was like, what is going on here? My head was spinning. And then I started reading, and then here I am, 9 years later.
Wow. I'm trying to think of an analogy of some kind. It's almost like if you were like driving a car that had square wheels or something, like it just wouldn't really work. But like if you chose to drive cars because you love to drive cars, you'd be endlessly frustrated. And then like if one day somebody switched the wheels out and they were round, and all of a sudden the car like worked. Like, I don't know, maybe that's a stupid analogy, but how did it feel?
I love it. I love it.
This was just on the fly.
Good one.
How did it feel to find that information and know that like the reason why you got into medicine was to help people? It's what you love to do 24/7, like you said, whether it's a taxi driver or your patients, to find that information and realize you could actually help people heal. What was that like?
Oh, it continues to be thrilling. I have to say, it continues to be unbelievable because it's so simple. It's almost embarrassing. It's so simple that, and you see people suffering so much unnecessarily. So the impact you can have, it makes your life, it gives so much meaning to every single day, right?
Wow.
So it's really a privilege really to be a doctor in a way, because patient after patient, you can actually, if you can get them to listen, you need that part, of course, that you can only control so much, right? But,
wow. So the wording that you used, the first word you said, thrilling. You said it's a privilege to be a doctor. I'm guessing that if I went out and just found 100 random doctors, I'm going to guess that probably not very many of them are going to say that their life is thrilling. Yours is thrilling finding this information.
Well, you know what? I have to say that it is. Every day I have, it's cheap thrills because it works. It's not me who came up with this, right? I'm lucky that I was able to adopt it and use it in my life, in my practice, in my, by changing my career. But yeah, it just works every single time. So anybody who's willing to listen and who wants to, you kind of have to be ready for it. It's not something, people have to have an open ear to it and be at a point in life where they're ready to make a change, a commitment. So clearly it's not for everybody, but those people that really need it, I am currently working in the Bronx with the most challenged population, really. Oh my God, I can't even tell you, when I hear story after story of these people that are going through such hard times, and yet they're desperate for somebody to listen to them and to give them something that works. So the compliance I'm getting there is amazing. I never expected that it would be so much higher than I would have thought, because there are ways of doing low carb. It just goes to prove that you do not have to be wealthy to do low carb. You do not have to be eating, all this expensive foods and the best, cuts of meat, etc. No, there are ways of doing this that are affordable and are just and can be life-changing. So people are doing fantastic, just fantastic. And I think that's why I'm like beside myself with excitement, because it is these people that are not exposed to these kind of options normally.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So, and because it really is so simple, and because medications are expensive, and then they run out of Medicaid, and then they don't have the medication, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and this is something that's in their hands, and all you have to do is give them this tool. So this is what is happening now, that I'm learning and seeing with my own eyes.
That's
so
amazing.
This,
wow. So, okay. So I was going to ask you about compliance. You have treated thousands, tens of thousands of people at this point between the Glandt Center, ONA, Bronx. Like, I mean, how many people?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say tens of thousands, thousands, yes, but
okay.
not tens of thousands. Yeah.
Okay.
Low thousands. Like, no, I know we treated at Glandt Center more than 3,000, but so, but
few people.
Yeah. Well, thousands I've treated in my life, but I'm saying with low carb ketogenic diets, 3,000.
Yeah, gotcha. So of that cohort, just observationally, what are the things that determine whether somebody is going to be ready to hear that information and is willing to change? Is it kind of contrasting with the Bronx where, maybe the desperation, like you said, is more driving the compliance? What kind of patterns have you noticed that determine whether somebody might be willing to follow this, or whether somebody might be more willing to just take a medication and continue dealing with these terrible symptoms?
One thing I always joke about is that you have to hear it from two different people. So usually when they've heard it from somebody else and then you hear it again, they're like, okay, when it's the very first time they hear it, they not in the Bronx. In the Bronx, it's like the first time they hear it and they do it. But in my regular practice, I find that if somebody has told them about it, it makes a big difference. So that's my experience. That kind of helps with compliance.
Yeah.
The best is if a doctor has also told them. That rarely happens, but if it's a good friend or a family member, it really helps.
Wow.
Compliance.
Interesting. Okay. So again, the cohort in the Bronx, what is the typical reaction when people learn that, whether they've been lied to or given the wrong information? I don't know the correct wording, but when they learn that they can do this themselves, are they ecstatic? Are they furious that they didn't get the information sooner? Do they feel like there were inequalities that prevented them from getting this information?
I think they've been very positive in general, receptive and positive. I haven't seen anybody get really angry. More a positive reaction, and especially as they start to see the results.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Well, I mean, again, I go back to the fact that it's so simple. Yeah. It's so simple once you get over the addiction, right? Yeah. The addiction is what stops us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And since most of us in the world are addicted.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yep. I agree. And that's me. And that's why I have to stay stricter in my own diet, because I know I'm an addict and I can't push too far into foods that I know are just going to trigger that and make it worse. So I totally understand that. Like I said, I did want to go over this document that came out. This came out on January 4th, 2024. I saw your name on it. People were sharing it around all over social media. I reached out that very second to see if you wanted to come back on the show. I'm glad you had time to do that. This document is called Use of a Very Low Carbohydrate Diet for Prediabetes and Type 2 Diabetes, an Audit. So can you tell me, first of all, what the difference is between an audit versus a study, or like what I would think of this as like a case study?
Well, so a study is, you would, well, there are many different types of studies, right? But basically the idea would be to compare two groups. In my clinic, we really can't do that. We could, because I don't have a group that uses the ketogenic diet and a group that doesn't at this point, because I'm going to offer it to everybody. So, when people come, that's the first thing I'm going to give them. Actually, a lot of people come and they don't know that that's the kind of clinic that we do. So not everybody's already biased to receive that. And a lot of them are shocked, but basically I probably will offer this to any diabetic, because diabetes is a carbohydrate intolerance. So to me, it makes the most sense. And then it depends on how complicated the patient is. We use various types of medications. So in this audit, it's just basically saying, hey, let's just take a look at the data. That's all we're doing here. So that's what we did. And we said, what kind of results are we getting? And I was influenced by David Unwin, who had done it in his own patient cohort. And I was like, hey, I want to do it, and see what's up with ours. So one of the things is that, you start paring it down. So, if I've seen thousands of patients, why are there only 344, even though it's one of the largest cohorts published in ketogenic diets and the use of ketogenic diets? But the reason is because, and you can see in the chart, we kind of pare it down and explain what happened. But so we had to really go into the patients that we had data for at time 0 and at some other point. And we found that time 6 months was a good point. We had a lot of data for month 6. So we thought that was a good place to start. So then, you start to eliminate those patients that we didn't have an original A1C. Okay, so then that patient falls out. And then you don't have, so anybody who had an A1C at time 0 and time 6 months basically made it in. But within that, then there was one that got pregnant in the middle, gets out. The other one, there are people who fall off the wagon for whatever reason, not because they weren't doing the diet. That doesn't count. But we did look at, for example, there were a few patients with very high creatinines, it was not reliable because the A1C wasn't reliable and their weight is not reliable, because they were holding on to tons of fluids and a lot of fluid variation. So those patients, again, are not. But I think we did include up until 2.5 creatinine. So that was our cutoff. So that's how we got down to 344.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that. That all is very well explained in the study itself, which is why it's kind of like me, like if you're really interested in this stuff, you have to like kind of dig around and you have to go to the actual study to read the data. You see, Netflix documentaries that are made about the twin study, for example, which just came out and everybody's talking about and promoting vegan diets. You can't just read the headline. You can't just, even the study itself has supplements and charts and things. And until you get there, you won't fully understand what they're measuring and how, poor a study is that like they're using. Like they're not measuring hardly anything and things are getting worse that they're not talking about. They're only talking about the things get better. It's only when you go to that depth that you find out, oh, okay, this is why, there have been 3,000 people, but they weren't, valid in what you were trying to measure. And that's how you were able to get it down. So that's all very well explained.
Okay, good. Good. I wish we had, yeah.
It also just, to me, it's like, it also shows how difficult these studies are, because you would think like, okay, just go through your patient files, comb through. It might take you a week or two to kind of write down some averages and put them in Excel. It's much more, challenging than that to get the good data.
Yeah. It's, the other thing is that we didn't include any of our patients that were there only for weight loss. So there were a lot of patients that came for fatty liver or for weight loss, et cetera. And we couldn't include them because if they didn't meet the criteria for prediabetes or diabetes, and it would be kind of painful because some of them were really, really successful. And I wanted to share that, but it didn't, it doesn't fit. So you leave them out.
Yeah. Good observation. Tell us about some of the markers that you were looking at the most. What were some of the most important things that you wanted to see in this group?
Well, what we want to show is that we can improve A1C while also improving by decreasing the amount of medications that the patients take. So that's really our goal is to, first of all, our goal is to make patients healthier. So how do I measure that? I look at the metabolic syndrome and I look at the 5 parameters, which are weight. Well, not really weight, waist circumference. So really weight is kind of a proxy, I gotta say. But we did look at weight, blood pressure, triglycerides, HDL, and sugar. So these are the main things we were looking at, and we followed all their medications. And we saw that actually in 79% of patients that took insulin, we were able to stop it. And of those that continued to take it, and this is also important, we were able to decrease the dose by 72%. So this is also, these might be patients that were on meds for a long time, like 30 years. Actually, the average was more than 20 something years. So these patients would normally not be able to get off insulin ever. But just the fact that they were maybe on 5 units of insulin, I would consider that a great success, because it's very different to take 5 units than to take 50 or a much higher amount. So that in and of itself makes a person feel better, and it helps them lose weight, and it helps them control their appetite, and all of these parameters that to me are what we're trying to accomplish in the clinic.
It's so amazing.
Another thing, one thing that's kind of interesting in our study compared to other studies is that the average duration of diabetes is much longer than anything that has been published. So if you look at any of the data, also any of the data actually that's been published, this is the longest. So our duration is 12 years on average, which means that some people had diabetes for 30 years.
Oh my goodness.
And still got a benefit out of it. Yes. Wow. So, it's real world and it works.
That's so amazing. Okay, so this might be a good time to do what I think you do the very best of anybody. You're so good at explaining this. Let's talk a little bit about the mechanisms that cause syndrome X, metabolic syndrome. What are the things that cause that? Why are we in such a bad place as far as that goes? Why is it that when I go to the store, it seems like pretty much 90% of people are walking around with this disease, and people seemingly don't know how to explain why we have it? And you're very good at it.
I am. That's funny because it's such a complicated issue and so difficult to explain. You know, I'm happy to hear you say that. I explained it well because I think that at the very, very root of it, we don't actually understand it so well. But let's put it this way, okay? I- Insulin is a hormone that stores energy. Stores. It's a storage hormone. It's a hormone that brings in nutrients such as sugar, and that's why it's very famous for lowering glucose in the blood. But it also stores fat. And so, because of that action of storing fat, basically, when the body is full and the fat cells are filled for that person, the body's like, stop, we're not responding to insulin anymore. And that's the beginning of insulin resistance in a way. Okay. That's like maybe a different way of looking at it than maybe I explained it before, but coming at it from like a different angle. It's basically the body saying, I don't want to store any more energy. I am totally full of it. So what happens is that basically insulin is released when we eat carbohydrates. By far and away, this is the biggest stimulus for secretion of insulin. So if I eat a piece of bread and now my body doesn't want it anymore because I'm full, you will secrete a lot of insulin. And the more insulin you secrete, eventually you will push through that threshold and get the sugar out and out of the blood. The blood sugar will remain normal, but now you've stored in spite of the fact that the body didn't really want to, right? Because the pancreas is so driven to keep the blood sugar normal that it will do everything it can. It will pump out as much insulin as it has to keep the insulin in the sugar in the blood normal. So the issue is that insulin needs to be low as possible between meals. And it should go up when we eat and really low between meals. And then again, up when we eat and really low between meals. And this balance of storage and usage, okay, when I would say usage is because insulin is what causes us to store. But when we lower insulin, this is what we need in order to use, in order to burn energy, in order to burn fat. I need to have low insulin levels because insulin inhibits the enzyme that actually liberates the fat from the fat cell. So in order to let that fat come out of the fat cell, insulin levels need to be low. And only when the fat leaves the fat cell, I can start burning it. So this insulin needs to look like this. Now, the issue is that when we have insulin resistance, when the body doesn't want to respond anymore, the more insulin you secrete, like in any system in biology, the more insulin you secrete, the more the receptors start to go, no, I don't want anymore. And because we secrete so much insulin, because we're eating carbohydrates all the time, this is what's leading to all the storage. So we're eating carbs, we're eating carbs, and every 3 hours, and then the apple, and then the sandwich, and then whatever. What ends up happening is that the receptors to insulin are downgraded, it's called. They hide. And now you need a lot more insulin. So this is, it's like you get into the cycle of, you keep storing and storing because the fat cell is still storing in spite of itself. And then it actually explodes. And that explosion it causes a lot of inflammation. So this is the situation. High insulin resistance it's almost a synonym for high insulin levels. And high insulin levels is a synonym for disease because that's insulin in and of itself is super inflammatory and can cause heart disease even on its own. Just high insulin levels independently will cause heart disease. But then you also know that through all the different mechanisms, for example, because it leads to high blood pressure, because it leads to weight gain, because it leads to the cholesterol being messed up, because of all of these things, it also causes other secondary, other complications, right? And because it leads to diabetes. I mean, what is diabetes? Where does diabetes fit in here? Well, basically, when the pancreas cannot keep cranking out all this insulin, then what happens? Your sugar starts to go up in your blood because you cannot, it's pushing, but it cannot push enough to get over the threshold. At that point, sugar starts to go up. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I'm telling you, you are so good at explaining that. Everybody should be able to understand that. And they can go to your website and see the amazing chart of the insulin rise that happens when we eat carbohydrates. Straight up, straight down. You or I, we've kind of changed our diet. So we could go to the southern part of South America. We could have amazing beef, which is protein, which you show the graph where it's a gentle rise and a gentle decrease. That comes with fat. Fat has virtually no real discernible rise in insulin. We would eat a meal. Both of us would probably become very satiated, very full. We probably wouldn't even be thinking about food or snacks for a very, very long time. And thus, if the listener can kind of think of like the area under the curve, how much area is under that curve of insulin? It's really not that much. A little bit for the protein. Your body can make as much carbohydrate as it needs. You get a little bit of fat. Your body burns the fat for energy. And then, maybe in another day, we could have another meal of amazing beef. We could have eggs or whatever. And that stays fairly low and stable. And you realize what the problem is in society. Carbohydrates are not the problem. It's constant carbohydrates all the time, 365 days a year, everywhere, at every store. And you see the area under the curve of that insulin, up, down, up, down, up, down. It's frankly amazing that people don't just die way sooner living that way. Like you could still live to be 80, 90, 100 years old eating that way. It's amazing, frankly.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. You're right. But people have, they suffer because they have joint pains and they don't sleep well, and they're, maybe they can't move around as well. They don't have energy because high insulin levels, as I said, they hog the energy. They don't let you. They make you tired, right? That's what happens. You're basically tired, and that's why one of the most enjoyable things is seeing the change in energy that happens about 2 weeks after you start the diet, right? After you get through that keto flu, at that adaptation time, then what happens is that you are actually full of energy. And then, that to me is one of the big bonuses of this diet, unlike any other diet.
Yeah, it's phenomenal to see. I'm like you. I never get sick of seeing it in any of my clients that want to try it, and they hit their stride at that 3 or 4 week mark, and they're no longer snacking. They don't need to. Their sleep is better. They're thinking more clearly. They've kind of like forgotten that fat loss and weight loss was their goal because that's like automatic. They're appreciating, like you said, joints don't hurt or their stomach isn't as bloated. Like there's so many other physical benefits. It's just it's staggering to see how well a human can live when they're eating the proper thing and how poorly they live when we're eating the wrong things.
Yeah, I had a patient tell me, so, you don't even, you can't even predict these things. She told me in the first meeting that her scalp was hurting her all the time, and I really didn't know what that was. But the fun part is that like 3 weeks later, she's like, "I've been suffering from my scalp hurting me all the time, the actual scalp, and it's gone." And I don't know what it was, but hey, she was really happy, and I was happy to see it gone. And she thinks it's 100% because of the diet, because she had it for so long. So, you don't even know what else is going to help.
Hear that story or stories like that all the time, constantly. That's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's nice side effect. Yes.
It's fantastic. Okay. So again, I don't have the full study in front of me, but I do have just kind of a brief, like Reader's Digest version. So bear with me as I try to find some of the things we were talking about. So, okay, we go back, you did the start, day 0 to 6 months is a good end marker. Patient records were reviewed for glucose control, weight, blood pressure, lipid profile, liver function, and medication usage. And like you said, you were wanting to get the medications down. You have done this for a while. You have taken people through. I'm sure you had some hypotheses before collecting all the data. What did you think the data were going to show?
Pretty much what it showed.
Pretty much what it showed.
I wasn't surprised. Yeah, I wasn't surprised.
Which doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. It was pretty much exactly what I thought. So it was there's you know, we're actually collecting data right now also on microalbumin, and it's very interesting. Also, that goes away or gets much better. So, I mean, and the liver function tests get better. These things that you know, I wish we could have done scans on everybody, but of course we don't have that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess out of the parameters we tested, none of it surprised me.
Okay, perfect. So let's just cover some of these, and you can comment on what you're on why this is important among patients with diabetes. So of the 344, 100 had pre-diabetes, 244 had full-blown diabetes. We see the median HbA1c drop from 59 millimole, which is 7.6 for us around here in the United States, to 45 millimole, which is 6.3, with 96.3% showing improvement. 96.3, a drop from 7.6 on average to 6.3 in 6 months in HbA1c. Tell us what HbA1c is, why it's important, and why that's significant.
Well, I would say that it makes it even more significant with the concomitant decrease in medications, right? So that's also what's cool about it. It's almost like this is a drug, right? Because it's a very efficient drug. It's, you know, if you think about Ozempic being a very powerful drug, well, this is just as powerful. So the fact that we're doing this and at the same time getting rid of a lot of medications, I think that's what makes it so interesting. What is hemoglobin A1C? Hemoglobin A1C is it's an average blood sugar for the last 3 months. It's basically looking at how much sugar sticks to the protein in hemoglobin. As we know, the problem with sugar is that sugar sticks to things, and this is what leads to some of the complications of diabetes. And this sticking can be measured because there's a very fine correlation between the average amount of sugar that's stuck to that hemoglobin to what's your average blood sugar for the last 3 months. And because a blood cell lives about 3 months, then that's why it can be measured really every 3 months. It can be measured more, but it's not a completely weighted average. It's not an evenly weighted average. The last month weighs more. So if you have so anyway, but that's the closest thing we have. It's a very good marker for kind of like giving you the address of where the person is standing, right?
Yeah.
Like where are you?
Right. To me, it almost seems like BMI. Like BMI for one individual tells you next to nothing. Like you could have a bodybuilder have a very high BMI, but generally speaking, if you're looking at like a population, if you're seeing BMIs of 40, you kind of know what's going on. And same with HbA1c is the way I look at it, is like, okay, if your HbA1c is like up in 8s, 9s, 10s, like something's up. We need to do something, right? Is that an easy way to look at that?
Yeah, or even less, right? Like even 5.8. You know, you already is telling you that something is not quite right, that your pancreas is not able to deal with the insulin resistance.
Right. And then the cutoff for the diagnoses of type 2 diabetes, is it 6.5 HbA1c?
6.5.
So on average, these people were 1.1 points above being diagnosed to being on average not diagnosed. We could call this a chronic progressive disease, is the way everybody talks about it. But these people, according to these numbers, no longer on average would be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
Right. The thing is that they have to be this way without meds or at least I think with metformin for 3 months. So that's why I couldn't call it reversal. I would have had to have the data for the next 3 months in order to go with the new diagnosis, like the new definition of reversal of diabetes.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I couldn't say that, but you're right.
We don't have to use those words, but it looks really, really good. We can say that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So again, now we go to the pre-diabetes. So this was 100 people. They experienced a drop from 42 millimole to 38.7 millimole. So that was a 6 to a 5.7. So they were not past the threshold. Again, they're in the pre-diabetes range, but even they saw 84% improving.
Yeah. So, you know, yes, it was great. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because also I changed throughout the years a little bit. So over the last few years, I've been much stricter with my patients. and much more conscious of taking dairy out to a minimum in a lot of people, and nuts. While at the beginning, and this data does include also the beginning, I was more liberal, let's say, and I used a lot of artificial sweeteners at the beginning, and that's something that I took out at the end. So I think probably, and I didn't really look at this, but I would imagine that the results got better over the years as we kind of also ourselves learned the data better, like learned the diet better.
That's a really, really good point. I think that just goes to show how powerful diet can be in some of this stuff. Maybe you didn't get it exactly perfect, in the very beginning, or maybe we'll know more things in 5 years down the road, but you still were able to get that many results. And it's fair to point out too, that this was not a controlled trial. This wasn't you feeding these people. This was you educating them. They could have left and ate whatever they wanted to. This doesn't, filter out people that claim they were compliant or not compliant or whatever. This is people that, you educated, and clearly they chose to do something and saw a great improvement. Is that correct? With what they did?
It's just, it's a clinic. Yeah, exactly. So that's how, you give the advice, and then whether they do it or not, it's not in your hands, right?
Right. Exactly. Okay. Awesome. Weight loss is the next one. Weight loss occurred in both groups. So, let's see, the changes were 6.5 and 5.7 respectively of the two groups. That's in kilograms. So people are losing, anywhere from about 10 to 15 pounds, 5 to 6 kilograms in a 6-month period. That's phenomenal. They've got to be happy about that.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Also totally expected. You knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. You just see it. Lower that insulin, give the body a chance to use that stored up energy.
Yeah.
So that's when people lose weight.
Perfect for the way you explained it to us earlier, that when the fat cells are allowed to open up, that is the fuel source that gets released. People have great energy. And again, you're using up fuel that you've already stored. So you're going to have less of it the more you use. So that's phenomenal. This is also going to summarize that blood pressure, triglycerides, and liver enzymes also improved. So of those, we really know how important triglycerides are. Triglycerides are the fat that travel around in your body. It's a storage form of fat. And people think like, okay, triglycerides fat, it must come from the fat that I consume. Why is it that triglycerides actually have way more to do with the carbohydrates you consume and not the fat that you consume?
Well, part of the reason why triglycerides go up in the blood, it's because, again, you're not able to use up the fat, right? So first of all, we have a very limited capacity. We don't have a lot of storage space for carbs. So once you have outdone this storage space, which is about 100 grams in the liver and some in the muscle, you're going to change that carbs into fat. And that fat better have a place to be. But when that fat cell is full, then that's it. Then actually, that's kind of, I think of it like as the spilling over of fat. Whether it's from the liver or from the fat cell or from just no place to be, the fat in the blood starts to go up. Fat in the blood is really what the triglycerides that you're talking about. So when the body is very inefficient at burning fat, you're going to see high triglycerides. So it really doesn't. It's not about the fat that we eat. It's more about the fact that we cannot process fat, that we can't use it. It's that we're inefficient at it. It's the fact that the insulin is high. Again, when the insulin is high, we can't burn fat.
Perfect.
So,
Yeah. So the analogy that I'll try to explain this to people is, think of the blood like the freeway, right? Like this is not where cars park. It's where cars go and drive around. And so if you have a lot of, energy in the blood, that might be like having a lot of cars on the road, and they just can't be that. You don't want too many cars on the road. You have accidents and all kinds of different problems. And so insulin could be the signal that says, okay, too many cars, like go find your parking spaces. And there's so few parking spaces for carbohydrates. If you use them and your exercise, you're active, things like that, the parking spots will empty and the cars will go drive around and whatever, there'll be space for it. But that is very limited. And your body also can start making more parking structures in the form of fat as like a long-term storage for some of these things. But eventually even your body can't even do that. And there just accumulates so many of these cars on the road that's when all the problems are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a place for a lot of confusion, because people think, oh, you're eating fat. Well, that's what leads to the fat in the arteries. No, that's a big confusion. The word fat is really confusing because, people get fat. They think that the fat is from the fat. just you know, they think that the fat in the arteries, in the blood, is from the fat that we eat. It's all very confusing. But the most important thing is that we want to be efficient at burning fat, exactly like you said.
Yeah, I love how Nina Teicholz used the line from Seinfeld in the 90s, or Jerry Seinfeld doing stand-up, where he said, everybody's obsessed with fat content. There's fat in this thing. It's going to be a me. Like, we had that fear of fat for so long when it has nothing to do with the fat that we consume. It is a shame that those two things have the same word, because you're right. Like, they're so different. And if we could have called it something a little bit different or looked at it a little bit differently, I think people would have had less fear about it. But is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nina, she's the one she's the best.
She's the best. She's the best. I love it. Initially, 78 patients were on insulin, reduced to 16 patients at 16 months. That is a reduction of insulin by 72%. Phenomenal. And you said these people could have been on insulin, could have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes for years. This wasn't just a new diagnosis. They just barely slipped over the line. This could have been somebody who's been on insulin for a very, very long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. A few of these patients are coming to mind. These are patients that are, long-term diabetics. We're talking like A1C 13 for like 30 years, so it's all relative, but it's still, they're still very grateful.
So somebody who's thinking like, okay, if my insulin is not responding anymore, what's the problem with taking more insulin? Can you explain why just adding more and more and more insulin to somebody is a very, very bad idea?
Yeah. So, type 2 diabetes is by definition, right? And intolerance to carbohydrates, but also if you measure the insulin levels in patients with type 2 diabetes, it is always too high. That is when it's diagnosed, it is always too high. So giving, more insulin, it's like not listening to what the body's saying. The body's saying, like I said at the beginning, I don't want to store anymore. I don't want to respond to this anymore. I'm resisting the insulin for a reason. Okay. For whatever really, putting words into our body, but whatever the reason is, okay, there's a downgrading of receptors. It is a homeostatic process where the body is like, does not want to respond anymore. And therefore, if I give more insulin, I might succeed in bringing the sugar down. Yeah, I will. Okay. If I give enough insulin most of the time, but not always. And I'm thinking of a patient I just saw with an A1C 15 and on, I think it's like 150 units of insulin.
Wow.
And it doesn't matter because the more insulin you give, the more insulin you give, there is no response. Right. But the issue is that most people, you will bring down the sugar. So that's confusing. You're like, oh, it does work. But what are we doing? We're making everything worse. We're giving more obesity, more high blood pressure, more triglycerides, lower HDL. And in the end, you are just accelerating the disease process.
Yeah.
So that's all you're doing. You're increasing your chances of dementia, of cancer. We know that the amount of insulin correlates with cancer, the severity of cancer. We know that that longevity correlates with low insulin levels. So we want low insulin levels, especially, in the fasting state. And giving more insulin will only make us feel better because the sugar is better. So it always matters. It matters how you lower the sugar. And, I've talked about this many times, but in the big trials, like the Accord trial or the VADT trial, these trials, or the advanced trial where they increased insulin in order to bring down the sugar, they had worse results. So that's not to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the drug companies have figured this out. That's why Ozempic and SGLT2s and all the family of Ozempic GLP-1s, what they decrease insulin. They actually do. People think they increase it, but they don't. They overall, they end up decreasing insulin. And that's why, one of the reasons why they're successful. So if you bring down the insulin, that's the only way you can actually cause weight loss.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting that you mentioned drug companies. That was actually going to be my next question for you. Let's say that rather than doing all of this with diet, let's say you found some kind of compound out there, made it into a drug, you tested it in different phases, the way that drugs are tested. And let's just say after being proven that it was safe to be able to take, and you could put this to market, if a drug got this type of result, these similar numbers, would this drug be like okay, pretty good, or would this be like an amazing, outstanding blockbuster? Everybody on the planet is taking this and you're making trillions and trillions of dollars.
Oh, great question. Well, it just, the thing is, if you think about the SGLT2s, okay, SGLT2s are this medication. They are what we do, but it's just that they do it a little bit, okay? And with side effects. But it's actually, that is this drug. And think how much more powerful we are in comparison, because an SGLT2 will lower your A1C by zero point 0.5. And here we lower the A1C from 7.6 to 6.3, right? So that's a lot more than 0.5. But the SGLT2s, by lowering and getting rid of sugar in the blood, in the urine, what happens is that leads to a decrease in insulin. So it's the only medication where you see the exact same profile as keto. So they increase LDL, they decrease triglycerides, they increase HDL, they cause ketosis and mild ketosis, they decrease blood pressure, but everything like a little bit, So that's why you don't, that's why you still have to, that's why they come to me on the SGLT2s and then we do keto. But it's just not enough. So imagine what a blockbuster this would be.
You could be a trillionaire. You could like cruise me around on your yacht or something. We could spend all kinds of money. Like you should be a trillionaire.
Yeah, but I don't know what drug would do this. No. I mean, someone will come up with it, but it's the key here. I go back to it. The problem here is the addiction.
Yep.
Yep. And the amount of redundant mechanisms we have that lead us to eat, right? So there's so many things that make us eat. There's so many hormonal pathways, et cetera, that cause us to eat. So this is a daily battle, and it's, throughout the day, every meal, you have to think about this, and it's exhausting for a lot of people, right?
It is.
So
yeah.
It requires a lot of focus.
Yeah. Yeah, but when you're talking about numbers like this in 6 months, it also makes people's craniums stop hurting when they were hurting them, and all of these other wonderful benefits. It's certainly worth it, and it's worth getting this information out. And as you're reading, the body of, the words in the actual study itself, there's a whole paragraph that says, like, we're in this, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, we're in this paradigm of diagnosing things like type 2 diabetes in a I can't remember the word, like glucose-centric kind of way. We're only looking at glucose. We're waiting while somebody has prediabetes until they get diabetes, which they will eventually if they don't change things, before we start treating this kind of thing. And the main takeaway, we really want everybody in the field to stop looking at just the glucose. We have to look at, like you talked about, insulin and glucose. We need both of those to be down. Just because the insulin is down, the glucose is down, if the insulin's high, you've got problems. Just like you've been explaining, we need to look at both. And this audit shows exactly why that would be the case.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because doctors don't prescribe insulin ever. They're not interested in seeing it. So for me now, this is such a crucial lab value that I find it weird that that my colleagues don't think so. Yeah. But that's the way it is.
That's the way it is. Yeah. Wow. Well, this is wonderful. I, for one, would throw you a parade for coming up with numbers like this. This is absolutely wonderful. I'm guessing that how has the response been? Obviously, people in the low carbohydrate space like myself think this is amazing and wonderful. Has this been well received? Have you done television interviews about this? Like, have you gotten tons of that parade I was telling you about? Like what's the response been?
No, nothing really. I mean, except, the low carb community has been very supportive, but, I wonder, it's really hard to get the message out. It really is hard. Yeah. I just think I was talking to somebody about this. I don't even remember. Maybe I don't remember to whom, but I just did the board endocrine review. Like you have to qualify as an endocrinologist, you have to do like these mock exams and then every 10 years there's a really big exam. And so anyway, as part of my credentialing, I had to do this test, and I was getting every single question wrong because you almost have to pick the opposite of what you would do in order to get the answer right. And I found that really sad. And I wrote them this long letter. So I don't know if anybody will listen to me, but I said you really need to consider, you know, a more emphasis on insulin resistance, because the field is really stuck. So for example, a patient is not responding to like 150 units of insulin. So what do? Well, you give more.
That's crazy.
That's the right answer. That's
crazy.
the right answer in an endocrinology test.
Wow.
So that's.
Yeah. Wow. I'm not getting a buzz off of 2 bottles of Jack Daniels a day, so you should probably give me a third, and then I'll get a buzz.
Yeah. I mean, that was a real question. So I think that's a very powerful thing that shocked me.
Yeah, that is shocking. Wow. And again, we're talking numbers and averages, and you get lost in 314 people. But I always just think back to HK. That's not a number. That's a person. That's somebody's life who has, things they like to do, and family and friends. And like, you get to be in front of these people and see these lives changed. And it's cool to see the numbers and see so many numbers. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that, like, if one person finds this information and changes their life, that makes it worth it. Like, that's it. That's a lot.
Yeah, you're doing an amazing job. Well, honestly, Casey, you're awesome.
Well, you are awesome. I appreciate the kind words, but you're the one that is actually doing the research and changing so many lives out there. You should be extremely, extremely proud. I did omit Ona from the introduction. Please tell us about Ona, the company that you've got. You're really working hard on it. Tell us a little bit about it.
We're basically doing the same thing, but through bringing this to the United States. We're going through a couple of different avenues, about to start a real clinical trial in West Virginia. So that's very exciting. And I'll tell you all about it next time.
I can't wait.
Once we got the results of that.
That's great. I'm assuming if it's West Virginia, it's got to be with Dr. Cucuzella.
Yes, but we won't tell anybody.
We won't tell anybody. That's fine. Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear about that. It's going to be phenomenal. But for now, just amazing to see this study, this audit. I can't call it a study. It's an audit, but amazing the work that you're doing. And you're really making a difference as far as helping people out there. You're doing such a great job. And I really appreciate you and your work. Tell everybody where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work.
Well, the website for the clinic, it's Glandt, glandt.co.il. That's in Hebrew, so you kind of have to do en, but that's not really relevant. But just go to ona.health, and there you can read a little bit and also fill in your information and say hi, and we'll get back to you.
Awesome. That's great.
Ona, like OWNA, like owning your health, taking responsibility for it.
Ona.health. We will be sure to link that. We'll link all of that in the show notes. Dr. Mariela Glandt, it was so great to catch up with you again and hear about your amazing work. Congratulations. Like I said, you should be very, very proud of this. And I hope more people find this. I hope you become a trillionaire, and I hope you get that parade. So
that is not the goal, but just want to reach out to people. That's it.
Well, it's amazing.
Anyway,
you're doing such a great job with that. Well, thank you very much again for coming on today. It was such an honor to host you.
Thank you.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. Thank you so very much for continuing to listen to Boundless Body Radio. As 2023 has come to a close and we're starting another new year in 2024, I always try to reflect on not only the direction that we want to go in the future, but also how much we have grown in this last year. Our podcast has now generated well over 400,000 downloads from all over the world, and it's all thanks to fantastic listeners like yourself. I hope you are as excited for the new year as we are around here. The lineup of guests that we have coming up is absolutely staggering, and we're always striving to bring you the best content from the most amazing people in health, nutrition, and wellness. Remember that you can always head on over to our website to book a complimentary 30-minute session with us at myboundlessbody.com. On our homepage, there is a Book Now button where you can select a time to speak with us about your health and fitness plan, especially for the new year. We've absolutely loved chatting with so many of you out there to bounce ideas off each other and try to come up with plans to help you achieve specific goals. And seriously, I really do mean this. Even if it's just to say hello and introduce yourself, we absolutely love connecting with our listeners in the community. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well if you want to watch these full interviews and also shorter interviews on more specific topics that are taken from these interviews. We've gotten really great feedback over there, and it's also a really fun way to interact with people who comment. We read and reply to every single YouTube comment we get, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave as many comments as you like to keep the conversation going. And of course, if you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really is the best way to make sure that the podcast gets out to more listeners. Your 5-star ratings and reviews are the best way to support us here at Boundless Body, and to support the podcast at Boundless Body Radio really only takes a moment, and it's very meaningful to us. Cheers to 2024, and thank you again for listening to Boundless Body Radio.